My beloved child, you must understand this part. They have been fighting a private war between what they show and what they feel. They may smile in public. They may stay silent in messages. They may appear distracted, distant, unavailable, or emotionally covered. But the soul does not obey appearances. The soul remembers who awakened it. The soul remembers who saw it without needing performance. The soul remembers who made it feel both afraid and alive. And your name became the key. Last night, your soulmate did not simply hear a name. They heard a mirror. They heard a reminder. They heard the echo of every moment they dismissed too quickly. They heard the softness they miss. They heard the unfinished truth between you. And then something happened that even they did not expect. A memory came back. Not the memory they usually allow themselves to think about. Not the easy memory. Not the one they can explain away. A deeper one. A moment where your presence made them feel seen in a way they had not felt before. It came suddenly, like a scene placed in front of their eyes. Your expression. Your energy. Something you said. Something you did not say. The way you made them pause. The way your silence sometimes spoke louder than other people's words. And in that returning memory, they realized something they had been avoiding. They did not just miss you. They missed who they were when your soul was close. That shook them. Because missing a person can be explained. But missing the version of yourself that existed beside them is harder to ignore. That means the connection touched identity. It touched awakening. It touched the part of them that had been asleep before you entered their life. And once that realization arrived, the night was no longer normal. They tried to continue. They tried to laugh again. They tried to listen to others. But your name had already entered the hidden room of their heart. And it did not leave. It sat there, glowing, waiting, as if heaven had placed a candle inside a place they had kept locked. Every few minutes, their mind circled back. Your name, your face, your energy, the question of what you might be doing, the question of whether you ever think of them too, the question of whether something was truly over, or only paused by fear, timing, pride, and pain. Listen closely now, because this is the part that changed everything. Someone near them noticed. Not everything. Not the full spiritual storm. But enough. They noticed the way your soulmate went quiet. They noticed the slight shift in their eyes. They noticed that after your name was spoken, your soulmate was no longer fully present. And this person said something simple. Something almost casual. But heaven used it like a blade of truth. They said, "You still react when you hear that name." That sentence pierced them. They may have denied it. They may have smiled it away. They may have looked down. But the truth had already been spoken. And once truth is spoken at the right moment, it does not return empty. It begins working. It begins pressing. It begins revealing. Your soulmate tried to defend themselves inside. No, it is not like that. I am only surprised. It does not mean anything. I am over it. But the soul stood quietly behind those excuses and said, "Then why did it hurt?" Not a painful hurt. A sacred hurt. The kind that appears when the heart touches something real after pretending it no longer needs it. My child, this was not punishment. This was awakening. Heaven did not allow your name to be spoken to torment them. Heaven allowed it because some people only understand what they feel when they are caught off guard. When the mind is prepared, it can perform. When the heart is surprised, it reveals. Last night, your soulmate's heart revealed itself. And what it revealed was not finished, not forgotten, not empty, not untouched. Your name still moves something in them. And the movement has now begun to grow. Because after that moment, they could not stop replaying the way they reacted. They became curious about themselves. That is important. Very important. Because when someone begins questioning their own reaction, they are no longer fully protected by denial. The walls begin to crack from the inside. They started wondering why your name felt different from every other name, why it did not pass through the room like sound, why it landed like a message, why it carried both comfort and discomfort, why it made them feel exposed, even when nobody knew the whole story. And deep beneath all of that, one truth began rising. They have not made peace with losing your energy. They may have made peace with silence. They may have adapted to distance. They may have learned how to keep moving. But they have not made peace with the absence of what your soul brought into their life. That is why your name mattered. That is why the night changed. That is why heaven is speaking to you now. Because what began as a small mention is turning into a spiritual collision. They heard your name from someone else, but the message was not from that person. The message came through them. Heaven used an ordinary mouth to deliver an extraordinary reminder. And the reminder was this: some connections cannot be buried while they are still breathing. Your soulmate felt that. They may not have named it. They may not have admitted it. But they felt it. And after the room moved on, after the conversation changed, after others forgot the moment completely, your soulmate carried it with them. They carried your name like a secret flame. They carried the shock of their own reaction. They carried the feeling that something unfinished had just touched them from another realm. And then, when the night grew quieter, the real unraveling began. Because it is easy to hide in noise. It is easy to pretend when people are around. But when the world becomes still, the soul speaks louder. They found themselves alone with the echo. Your name returned again. This time not from another person's voice. This time from inside. They heard it in their thoughts. They felt it in their chest. They saw flashes of what once was, what almost was, what could have been, and what may still be waiting beyond the visible. And then came the question that frightened them most. What if I was wrong? Not wrong about everything, but wrong about what they believed they could ignore. Wrong about how deeply you mattered. Wrong about the meaning of the connection. Wrong about the way heaven sometimes hides destiny inside difficulty. That question did not leave. It followed them. It sat beside them. It watched them scroll, walk, lie down, stare, breathe. What if I was wrong? And my beloved child, when that question enters a heart, the story begins to shift. Because regret is not always loud. Sometimes regret begins as curiosity. Sometimes it begins as a pause. Sometimes it begins when one name makes a person realize their soul still turns toward someone they claimed they released. This is why part 1 cannot end with a simple answer. Because last night was only the opening of the door. What happened after your name was spoken was not the final revelation. It was the first signal. The first crack. The first movement in a place heaven had been watching for a long time. There is something your soulmate remembered after that. Something specific. Something they had hidden from themselves because it carried too much truth. And when that memory returned, it did not come alone. It brought a feeling. It brought a decision closer. It brought a message to the edge of their heart. But before that message could rise fully, another sign appeared. A sign connected to you. A sign they could not explain away as coincidence. And when they saw it, their entire expression changed. Because for the first time in a long time, they realized your name had not been spoken last night by accident. A strange thing happened after the silence settled. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Not with flashing signs or voices from the sky. The kind of thing heaven often does is much quieter than that. It arrives softly, almost invisibly. And yet when it arrives, it changes the direction of an entire story. My beloved child, do not rush past this moment. What happened next is the reason your soul was guided here. Because after hearing your name, after carrying the echo of it through the rest of the night, after questioning feelings they thought were long buried, your soulmate eventually found themselves alone. The conversations ended. The noise faded. The distractions disappeared one by one. And for the first time that night, there was nowhere left to run from their own thoughts. They sat there, still, quiet, trying to convince themselves that the reaction meant nothing, trying to explain it away, trying to place logic over something that was never born from logic. Yet the harder they tried to dismiss it, the stronger the feeling became, because some truths grow louder when ignored. The more they pushed the thought away, the more it returned. The more they tried to focus on something else, the more your presence seemed to appear in unexpected places. And then, something happened. Something small enough for most people to overlook. But heaven does not overlook small things. Because sometimes destiny enters through details. Your soulmate saw something that reminded them of you. Not a direct message. Not a photograph. Not someone mentioning your name again. Something much simpler. A song. A phrase. A color. A memory trigger hidden inside an ordinary moment. And suddenly the wall they had been building all night cracked a little further. The memory that returned this time was different. Stronger. Clearer. More dangerous to ignore. Because this memory carried emotion. Real emotion. Not nostalgia. Not fantasy. Not wishful thinking. Emotion. The kind that reaches into the chest and quietly asks questions the mind does not want to answer. For a moment, they stopped moving. Their eyes remained fixed. And they remembered something about you that they had not thought about in a very long time. Not your appearance. Not the obvious things. Something deeper. Your energy. The way people often remember words but forget feelings. Yet somehow your soulmate remembered the feeling. The feeling of being understood. The feeling of being seen. The feeling of not needing to explain every piece of themselves. And that realization hit harder than hearing your name. Because names can be forgotten. Faces can blur. Time can create distance. But feelings are harder to erase. Feelings become part of the soul's memory. And when those memories awaken, they do not ask permission. They simply return. Stay here with me. Because this is where the story begins moving faster. Your soulmate suddenly realized that they had spent more time remembering you than they wanted to admit. Not every day. Not every hour. But enough. Enough to know the connection never fully disappeared. Enough to know certain thoughts still carried your signature. Enough to know there was a reason hearing your name affected them the way it did. And that realization created another question. A bigger one. A question that had been waiting beneath the surface for longer than they realized. What if they still think about me too? The moment that thought appeared, everything changed. Because until then, they had only been wrestling with their own emotions. Now they were wondering about yours. Now their attention shifted. Now the story became larger than memory. Now possibility entered the room. And possibility is powerful. Because possibility creates movement. Possibility creates curiosity. Possibility creates hope where certainty once said there was none. They tried to stop themselves. They really did. Part of them said no. Part of them warned against it. Part of them reminded them of reasons to stay detached. Reasons to stay protected. Reasons to stay emotionally distant. But another voice was growing stronger. A quieter voice. A deeper voice. The voice of the heart. And that voice kept asking the same thing. What if there is more to this story? My child, many people think soul connections disappear because communication disappears. But heaven has seen countless stories unfold. And one truth remains. Silence does not always mean absence. Distance does not always mean ending. And forgetting is not always as complete as people pretend. There are connections that continue growing underground long after both people stop speaking about them. Roots do not need attention every day to remain alive. Some roots travel deeper in silence. And your soulmate was beginning to feel those roots again. The night continued. The clock moved forward. Yet instead of fading, your presence seemed to become stronger. That was the part they could not understand. Normally distractions weaken emotions. Normally time softens reactions. Normally thoughts drift away. But your name had triggered something entirely different. Every hour seemed to reveal another layer. Another memory, another realization, another unanswered question, and then something happened that truly unsettled them. They remembered a specific moment involving you, a moment they had always dismissed, a moment they thought was insignificant, a moment they thought they understood, but suddenly they saw it differently, from a completely different angle, and the new understanding shook them. Because they realized they may have misunderstood your heart. For a long time. Longer than they wanted to admit. Maybe they misread your silence. Maybe they misread your actions. Maybe they assumed things that were never true. Maybe they walked away from understanding too quickly. Maybe fear disguised itself as certainty. And once that possibility entered their mind, they could not push it back out. The human heart can survive many things, but one thing it struggles with is the realization that it may have been wrong about someone important. That realization stays. It follows. It demands answers. And suddenly your soulmate wanted answers. Not because someone forced them. Not because anyone persuaded them. Because their own soul had started asking questions. Questions only you seemed connected to. Do not skip this part, because something even more unexpected was about to happen. The deeper they thought about you, the stronger a strange sense of familiarity became, almost as if they were being guided somewhere, not physically, spiritually, emotionally. It felt like pieces were beginning to connect, pieces they had ignored before, pieces they had overlooked. Pieces that now appeared to fit together in ways they never noticed. One memory led to another. One thought connected to another. One feeling unlocked another. Until eventually they found themselves staring into the darkness of the night asking something they never expected to ask. What if this connection was never random? That question frightened them. Because random things are easy. Random things require no responsibility. Random things can be forgotten, but meaningful things are different. Meaningful things demand reflection. Meaningful things refuse easy explanations. Meaningful things stay. And your soulmate was beginning to suspect that what existed between you belonged in that category. Not random. Not accidental. Not ordinary. Something else. Something deeper. Something heaven had been quietly protecting. My beloved child, there are moments when destiny moves without announcing itself. No trumpets. No obvious signs. Just a gentle shift inside the human heart. Last night became one of those moments. Because your soulmate reached a point where they could no longer deny what was happening. The reaction was real. The memories were real. The emotions were real. The questions were real. And once they admitted that much to themselves, another door opened. The door of honesty. For the first time in a very long while, they stopped trying to convince themselves that none of it mattered. Instead, they asked a different question. What am I supposed to learn from this? The atmosphere changed immediately, because that question invites revelation. And revelation was already waiting. That is when another memory surfaced. One they had buried deeper than all the others. A memory involving a conversation. A moment. A feeling. A look. Something that seemed ordinary at the time, yet now appeared incredibly important. The memory arrived suddenly. So suddenly that it took their breath away. Because they realized there had been a message hidden inside that moment all along. A message they failed to understand when it first happened. And now they were finally seeing it. But understanding the message created another problem. Because if the message was real, then certain choices they made afterwards suddenly looked very different. Certain assumptions looked different. Certain conclusions looked different. Even certain regrets looked different. The pieces were moving. The picture was changing. And the more it changed, the harder it became to ignore you. Not because heaven was forcing anything. Because truth was revealing itself naturally. One layer at a time. One realization at a time. One heartbeat at a time. And somewhere between those realizations, a feeling appeared that surprised them more than anything else. Gratitude. Yes, gratitude. Because despite the confusion, despite the distance, despite everything that happened, they suddenly felt grateful that they had known you at all. Grateful that your path crossed theirs. Grateful that your energy entered their life. Grateful for moments they once took for granted. And gratitude has a unique power. Because gratitude softens defenses. Gratitude opens hearts. Gratitude allows people to see value where they once saw loss. Your soulmate felt that softening. They felt the walls lowering. They felt resistance weakening. And that is exactly when heaven placed something extraordinary in front of them. Not a coincidence. Not an accident. Not something easily explained away. A sign. A very specific sign. One connected directly to the questions they had been asking. The timing was impossible to ignore. The connection was impossible to overlook. And when they saw it, they froze. Because suddenly hearing your name no longer looked random. The memories no longer looked random. The emotions no longer looked random. Everything seemed connected. Everything seemed part of something larger. Something unfolding. Something alive. Something moving toward a destination neither of you could fully see yet. And as they stared at that sign, one final realization emerged. A realization so powerful that it changed the entire direction of their thoughts. They whispered something to themselves. Something they had not admitted before. Something they had resisted for a very long time. Something that carried more truth than they were prepared for. And the moment those words left their heart, everything shifted. Because what they admitted next revealed the secret they had been hiding even from themselves. And that secret is where the real story begins.